How to Become a Virgin by Quentin Crisp, Chapter 7. The difference between my life before and after the naked civil servant was broadcast became most clearly visible at the King's Head. When I returned there in the spring of 1976, the little huddle of embarrassed friends sitting at one table had become a crowd so numerous that some members of the audience were obliged to lean against the back wall of the room for an hour, holding empty beer glasses and the plates on which their pork pies had stood. Lunchtime theater-goers in public houses are not only drinkers whose feet are killing them, and who want to sit down anywhere at almost any price. People gather from far and wide, and even from high and low. On one occasion, Mrs. Churchill brought Lady Diana Cooper, who looked magnificent in a huge black hat, as though she were in mourning for Ascot. As far as I know, the phenomenon of lunchtime theater has never been explained. During the war, it was justified by the fact that many people were reluctant to go out in the evening. They either found the blackout too confusing, or the aerial bombardment too frightening. Now that these adverse conditions no longer prevail, why has such an obviously inconvenient form of entertainment returned? Undoubtedly, it is part of the general de-glamorization of show business. It accords with the modern notion that anyone can entertain. Get yourself a guitar and you'll be a pop star in no time. But in fact, theater, in a very confined space, is acknowledged by professionals to present its own particular difficulties. There can be no anxious glances into the wings to see what on earth has delayed your leading man. There must be no nervous trembling of the hands except for dramatic purposes. No perspiration must appear on the brow. The entire audience is so close that details like these can easily be seen. Actors only do this work because they must. Employment is so hard to find that they will adapt themselves to whatever conditions are imposed upon them. In lunchtime theater, they will force themselves to act with the same attention to detail that they would display before the television cameras. Lunchtime entertainment is welcomed by impresarios as well as by starving actors. It provides as many showcases as Burlington Arcade, and at half the price. It is a place where a protégé can be seen performing in a properly lighted area before an audience that has paid to see her. For all concerned, this is at least a fairer test of histrionic ability than sitting in a producer's office crying, "Woe unto Ilium!" All these advantages to individuals who are in or on the periphery of show business do not, however, explain why real people attend these events. It must be very inconvenient for a girl to fling the cover over her typewriter and dash through the streets, snatching up a sandwich en route, like a Polish lancer displaying his horsemanship. Nevertheless, I know that women in full employment came to hear me. On one occasion, a girl started to leave before the end. When I implored her not to go, even offering to say the opposite if she would stay, she replied in a mournful voice, "I have to get back to work." It seems strange that, for such a fragment of diversion, anyone would risk incurring her boss's displeasure with her unpunctuality, and start an afternoon's drudgery racked by indigestion and with a heart pounding from having run all the way along Upper Street. Yet some people have not found the price too great. Perhaps there is no mystery. Possibly lunchtime theater is merely blindly following a fashion set by the Edinburgh Festival. There, entertainment starts at 11:30 in the morning, and covers every available horizontal surface, of which there are not many in Scotland's capital. This welter of frivolity in the grimmest city on earth was something of which at that time I had barely heard. Soon I was to experience it. I have been to the Edinburgh Festival 3 times. The last time I took part in the inaugural parade, and sat in a coach beside a famous Scottish actress called Miss MacArthur. Crowds lined the streets, leaned out of every available window, and even climbed the trees along our route. As Miss MacArthur smiled, bowed to right and left, and waved, she said to me, "We'll never work for a bigger audience than this." She was right. I enjoyed myself enormously, but looking back, I think the year I liked the festival most was my first year in 1976, when everything about it was new to me. That summer the city was ruled by Miss Greer. She was there to explain to the world the various events. She is very tall and quite formidable, an effect that she offsets by weaving into her public image an element of self-doubt. While she interviewed me sitting on a bench in some public gardens, she brushed the front of her dress and said to the technicians, "I've got marmalade on my skirt." This small gesture I took to be a manifestation of what Mr. Tennyson called craven fears of being great. I was working for a group of students from Bristol University. I occupied a room in one of the 2 huge flats which they had rented. Early one morning, Miss Greer visited us. The television crew that accompanied her everywhere woke up the students and told them to look as though they were asleep. When the sea of horizontal bodies had been photographed, we all sat round the kitchen table for a cornflakes session. I think the young people were required to be helpless waifs far from home. This is one of my favorite roles, but the students seemed reluctant to cooperate. Perhaps they feared that their parents would watch the program and that thereafter the hall would be knee-deep in a snow of anxious letters. During this visit, Miss Greer was taken on a tour of inspection of the various rooms. When she beheld the dilapidated state of my hairbrush, her heart was touched, and she bought me a new one. Years later she said to me, "The way the press went on, you would have thought it was of solid gold." To me, of course, it was solid gold. Every fringe theatre in Edinburgh is full, because, out of loyalty to the profession, all the actors who are not on their own stages are in the auditoria of their colleagues. The Harriet Watt Theatre, where I worked, was no exception. On my very first day, when I asked the audience if it had understood, and furthermore believed me, a man sitting right at the back of the house complained that I had not, as he had hoped, conducted a serious existential discussion. I apologized and explained that he must not imagine that, because I was smiling, I did not at any time say what I did not mean. Seated beside this gentleman was his wife, or worse. She asked if she could not have a lifestyle which included her children. I pointed out that the trouble with children was that they were not returnable. When the audience seemed to find this remark amusing, the unknown orator deflected his rage from me to the people around him. "You're sycophants!" he cried, but his enemies were not to be cowed. For the first time I then realized the truth of a statement made in her autobiography by Miss Bergman, that people come to the theatre hoping, longing to be entertained. They want performers to succeed. They certainly do not come primarily to be informed. Now that I have had more experience of public speaking, I know that I should have invited the heckler down onto the stage. We could have had a debate which would have enlivened the afternoon miraculously. At the time, I only waited feebly for the storm to pass. During that first week in Edinburgh, I was summoned back to London by Thames Television, so that I might appear on a program with Mr. Hurt and Mrs. Whitehouse. The umpire was Mr. Cavett. After the show, when we were in the drinking-room, he said that, if I ever went to the States, he would invite me on to his own program. such a possibility seemed very remote then. I admire Mrs. Whitehouse, though I do not suppose that my adulation is something that she seeks. She knows exactly what she is doing. Just as Miss Greer uses self-doubt to soften her personality, so Mrs. Whitehouse adds to her puritanical image a pinch of sensuality. On the evening when I met her, she was wearing a brick-red suit. She had curly hair, and her slightly pouting lips were painted a pale orange. These adornments that ran counter to the public's idea of her would lose her a few marks were she being judged as a stylist. But, as the adjuncts of an evangelist, they work in her favor. If she wore doll clothes, had thin lips, and scraped her hair back from her brow, the world would say, "Look at her, no wonder she's against sex." She has seen to it that this sort of comment shall not be made. She is watchful not only of what she looks like, but also of what she says. When asked if she found the naked civil servant shocking, she replied that she did not, and added that she thought the program had been sympathetically made, and that she had learned a great deal from it. Mrs. Whitehouse never puts a foot wrong. Going to Edinburgh was not my first visit to Scotland. I had already been for a day, a night, and a day to St. Andrews to talk to the university students. There is no railway station at St. Andrews. When they built the famous golf course, they removed all hope of reaching it. Instead, I arrived at a place called Lucars. Standing on the station platform, I found myself in a typically Hitchcockian setting. All around me the land was as flat as Texas, and no matter where I looked, I saw no sign of human life. If the sinister crop sprayer flies overhead, I thought, I shall have no sugar canes among which to hide. Fortunately, some students came to meet me with a car. Immediately I found them more relaxed than their equivalents in England. The reason for this had already been explained to me by Mr. Quentin, who then ruled the university, but who now rules Punch. "The young of St. Andrews never march," he told me. "There are only 2 streets to march along, and they never carry banners because the wind is too strong." St. Andrews is built on the very edge of the world, not by the sea, but overhanging it. The whole town bristles with cannon emplacements, is riddled with dungeons, and encrusted with ruins. The traditional English view of the Scots must have been based on the landscape. In fact, the inhabitants not only of St. Andrews, but of everywhere that I have been in Scotland, are communicative, laughter-loving, and indulgent with foreigners to the verge of folly. On my way back to real life, I was shown the beauties of Edinburgh by a friend of mine who rules Waverley Station. He is devoted to antiquity. Pointing with a Charlie's Aunt umbrella to a row of houses the color of atomic ash, he said, "Modern 1820s stuff." To me, the greatest delight of that sight-seeing tour was the river. The Leith has mossy banks, is canopied by tall trees, bejeweled with emerald green subaqueous ferns, and runs laughing through the forbidden city. Arriving back in London, I reckoned that I had traveled for over 18 hours in order to speak for 2, but it had all been worth it. Chapter 8. Once, during a childhood holiday, an aeroplane landed in a field behind whatever seaside resort my parents had chosen for that year. As soon as the inevitable crowd had collected, a tour started to sell 5-shilling tickets for a short air trip. My sister and I queued up, were whisked around a few neighboring fields for about 5 minutes, and were then returned to Earth. As so often happens if I recall any childhood experience, I remember trying to feel the appropriate emotion. I wanted to be afraid, or at least amazed, as the wind rushed past my ears and the world dipped beneath me. I did not succeed. More than 50 years were to pass before I again traveled by air. This time it was to make my mad dash from Scotland to London and back for my brief meeting with Mr. Cavett. This journey was a little more exciting. Flying machines, I had discovered, had become heavier, and when they leave the ground, it is possible, by an effort of identification, to share with them their struggle to gain altitude. I found air travel to be a mode of transport that I enjoyed, so, when invited to go to Belfast, I had no qualms. Once you've done one festival, I thought, you've done them all. I was wrong. Going by plane to Ireland is a slightly different experience. The amount of time spent in the sky is about the same as when you visit Scotland, but the number of hours occupied by wandering round the airport is greater. I think that there is only one plane making the Belfast run. If it hasn't returned, you wait. If you haven't any crossword puzzles to do, you can always spend the time being searched so thoroughly that you are even required to take off your hat, and you may have everything you are carrying taken from you, even your umbrella. What, I asked, could I do with that which would be considered immoral or subversive? I received no reply. The Festival of Northern Ireland relies heavily on that one vehicle shuttling to and from England. If it doesn't arrive on time, programs have to be altered or even cancelled. I was 2 hours late, but that hardly mattered, as I was not due to perform until the early evening. I was met by an organizer and taken into the city by a circuitous route. The driver explained that it was prettier than the more direct route. I dutifully admired the scenery, but I knew that what she meant was that on this route we were less likely to be questioned. My arrival, like that of any British person, was regarded as a gesture of affirmation, almost as a message of hope. The organizers of the festival were very concerned that I should be treated well. Even so, once in Belfast, there was hardly time to eat. Every moment until my first performance was taken up with interviews. The press was not hostile, but the questions it put to me were less bland than they had been in Edinburgh. I was asked if it worried me that people might come to see me out of mere curiosity. In fact, that is the reason why I am watched by audiences anywhere, to see how anyone so wicked can still move and speak. But I replied that the spirit in which the public arrived was less crucial than its mood when it left. The weather was more predictable than the interviews. It rained. The sky was incessantly racked by dark, swiftly moving clouds, like the tattered flags of a defeated rabble. All this I had expected. My first real shock was finding that the facades of both the television stations were ironclad like the sides of battleships. Once, presumably, they were resplendent with wide glass doors, a few marble steps, and a long inquiry desk. Now there was an opening no wider than the front door of an ordinary house. When this was unlocked, I saw almost immediately behind it another door. In between the two, there was just room for me, my escort, and the janitor. If we had shot him, the second door would not have been opened. Except that the small space was not filled with water, it was like the Davis device of a submarine. I realized then how great was the city's terror of inflammatory propaganda. If any unauthorized person could have reached the microphones to say that the Pope was infallible and that the city had fallen, panic would have set in. In London we would know that it was Mr. Wells having us on, but there the effect would be disastrous. My audience on my first evening consisted almost entirely of women. They were very attentive, but were made uneasy by almost everything I said, even though I remembered not to mention you-know-who or the Pope. When someone complained that she couldn't possibly do any of the things I recommended because she had to hurry home to cook a meal for her husband and 3 sons, I said, "Leave them." The whole room gasped. An English audience only would have smiled. It is difficult for us to comprehend that the people of Northern Ireland are ruled by a regime that is less concerned with morality than with religious doctrine. Their sectarianism is so divisive that if you say you are an atheist, they ask, "But is it the God of the Catholics or the God of the Protestants in whom you do not believe?" Apart from their religious beliefs, the poor in Ireland, as everywhere else, seem chiefly concerned with living to the next day. It is the rich who are worried about the fair name of their country. At a posh party I attended, before I had uttered a word, someone had protested, "Things are not as bad as they are made out to be." The terrible truth is that there is a sense in which the troubles are not bad enough. Life can go on indefinitely, absorbing a few more pointless deaths every day. No major decision is forced upon anyone, and if it were, what would it be? When you ask the young people there what they want, they reply to be left alone. They have no desire to be annexed by Holy Ireland, nor do they want to be a part of England. They want to be the inhabitants of Northern Ireland. Perhaps the solution to the whole problem would be to give the place an entirely new, non-inflammable name. On the evening when I was not working, I was taken to a banquet given by the city's gay population. They are angry, and no wonder. They have to bear the shame of being part of the British Empire, while reaping none of the benefits of its genial depravity. But even there, as in so many places on earth, the quarrel is less with the law than with the police. You might think that the constabulary of Ulster had enough to do just staying alive, but no, it finds time to chivvy the gay men incessantly. One young man had been held in a police station for hours, on suspicion. No complainant had come forward to state that he had been corrupted. No time or place had been specified when or where the crime was supposed to have occurred. I would say that, by any standards, this procedure would be classified as harassment. I had gone to Northern Ireland, not exactly to be shot, but certainly in the hope of being shot at. I was beginning to realize that, though some may have publicity thrust upon them, I was someone who must achieve it. I jumped up and down in front of the soldiers, but they ran away. Because of the various festivals, I was starting, in a very small way, to travel. I never envied people who went abroad. I knew that the experiences that they described as so pleasurable would for me be uncomfortable or might lead to humiliation. My relationship with the English was dodgy enough. With the inhabitants of a foreign country it might be downright frightening. Those of my friends who took their holidays outside Britain usually went to France. They either spoke tourist French without any apparent feeling of degradation, or they were content to wave their arms and offer less, which in Paris is practically a full-time occupation. The ostensible object of these vacations was either sightseeing or, if they were spent on the Mediterranean coast, sunbathing. The first of these pastimes tires me, the second makes me positively ill. The real purpose of these holidays abroad was to air a sophisticated preference for a continental way of life which, to the English before the common market opened, represented culture or art. 2 more causes of fatigue and nausea. Abroad in those days, I felt, had nothing to offer me. Now, at the festivals, I saw that foreign countries need not be irritating regions where I would be compelled to sit around wondering what people were saying about me. If carefully selected, they could be new worlds to conquer, or at least new worlds to con. I also discovered that the appalling anxieties attendant upon getting from one country to the next could be delegated to others. Within 2 years of my first timid departures from England, I was in a situation where these conditions were nearly always fulfilled. Among the men who interviewed me in Northern Ireland was a Mr. Rafferty. When I returned to England after my first visit to New York, we met again. This time, on the Mohammed principle, he came to Britain for the purpose of preparing a radio program on the invasion of privacy. He wished to start this project with me because he judged that my opinions on the subject would be the most extreme. He was right. What is privacy for, if not for invading? By now, I am happy to say, I have no private life. I want none. Like most people who are not quintuplets, I started out with one, but, a little at a time, I have divested myself of it, as a traveler abandons superfluous baggage when he sees that the night is coming and his destination is still a long way off. I quite understand Miss Loren's indignation at being photographed in church at a funeral. I only doubt that I would experience the same reaction as she. Inevitably, I would find myself trying to mourn more picturesquely. This kind of response to public notice is part of my attempt at the unification of my personality. I avoid using the word integrity, because there is nothing particularly moral about this endeavor. It is merely something I wish to accomplish. I am saddened when anyone does not recognize that this is my aim. Occasionally, after a performance, I receive a letter from a member of the audience asking me to interpret, in terms personal to her, some general statement that I have made during the show, and there are many. This I do gladly, but my answer often provokes another letter complaining, "But those are the responses that you would make from the stage." This comment makes it appallingly obvious that my correspondent has supposed that what I said in the theater I did not mean. While it is true that I seek to entertain with every word I utter, I am never insincere. Indeed, if there is any enjoyment in An Evening with Quentin Crisp, it seems to me to lie in the fact that I am saying exactly what I think, and that my ideas strike the audience as bizarre. A discrepancy of modes of thought is at the heart of one kind of humor. For me, every performance is a small essay in self-revelation. At the end of it, whoever is seated in front of me knows me as well as people whom I have met on and off throughout the years. On occasion, someone will say, slightly contemptuously, "Yes, you know all these people, but are they really your friends?" I do not grade my acquaintances in order of intimacy. The ones I see most are usually those who live nearest, or who make the most insistent demands. If being in love involves laying bare one's body and soul to one person, then I am in love with the world, and my whole life is a slow and often interrupted wooing of the human race. I am seen and heard, therefore I am. The more often and the more clearly I am seen and heard, the more fully I feel that I am alive. Should these sentiments reveal me to be a shallow character, I accept the criticism without a murmur. People repeatedly warn me that, if I am not careful, I shall start to believe my own publicity. It is my opinion that I must believe it. Any other attitude would be deceitful. It would imply that lesser mortals might be dazzled by the flack with which public figures are surrounded, but that we are sitting at the heart of it, indifferent, or worse, cynically amused by a hoax being practiced in our name upon an innocent public. We must either insist that what is printed on the dust jackets of our books or in our program notes be reduced to human proportions, or we must continually strive to become what our public relations experts claim that we are. To be identified with our publicity is simply yet another way of merging our outward and inward selves.